Welcome to Lighten Up, the art of living clutter-free, the podcast where we tackle the literal and figurative clutter standing between you and your healthiest and happiest life. I'm Melanie, your host, coach, and guide on this journey to help you design a life that you love. Whether it's clearing out your kitchen cabinets, untangling your digital files, or letting go of the mental blocks that hold you back, we're here to make space for what truly matters. Let's lighten up together. Starting now. Hello and welcome back to Lighten Up, the Art of Living Clutter-Free. I'm Melanie, your host, and this is one of those days where I have brought a guest on. So if you don't know already, I am the creator of the Design Your Healthy Life Strategy program where I help people lose weight, get healthy by removing the physical and, most importantly, the mental clutter in their lives. And the reason I have Kristen on with me today is that she is a master when it comes to removing the mental clutter. So, Kristen, thank you for being here today.
Yes, I am so excited and appreciate the opportunity to speak to you and speak to your viewers.
Amazing. Amazing. So we met in a networking group. We live in the same neighborhood in Brooklyn, which is amazing.
Yeah.
But why don't you tell everybody, briefly, who are you and why are you here?
Okay. So I'll start, but I promise it won't be long. I'll start with that I am a daughter of Cuban refugees, and they brought me up in every single way to survive and to thrive in this life. And there were a lot of elements of that to this day have served me so well. And then there were also a lot of elements to that made life a little challenging. You know, it was driven in me to be a people pleaser, to work really hard, to do it all yourself. And it did serve me a little bit in life. And at though a certain point, it hit the wall. It became too much. I was facing anxiety, feeling depressed, losing my hair, had a lot of digestive issues. And, even now I face a chronic illness. And when this happened to me, I was like, this is not okay. Things need to change. And I did therapy, I did podcasts, I did meditation, and they served me a little bit. But it wasn't until I got into the world of somatics and embodiment where my life had transformed. I really began to live a fuller expression of myself. And so, as a result of that, I am now a trauma conscious embodiment coach and a trained therapist. And I absolutely love what I do. I see it as a gift, and I absolutely love speaking with people about it and working with my clients. So, as I said before, I am so excited to be here to have that opportunity to share more about it.
I love it. I love it. So first of all, I didn't know that your parents were Cuban refugees. I would imagine that the world that we're living in right now is very interesting to anybody who is first or second generation here. We could do a whole episode about that. But in the meantime, so I have you here because one of the things that I really try to get people to understand is that the clutter in our brains are what's holding us back from reaching goals or living a health a life full of health and wellness. And a lot of people don't really understand what that means. You know, maybe they tried meditation at some point in their life, or they've done yoga, or like my favorite is a sound bath. That is like the greatest thing for me in clearing the mental clutter. But I also don't think that a lot of people really understand what mental clutter is. And so if I can just say for the listeners, if this concept hasn't come to you, think about all of the self-limiting beliefs. Think about all the things that you tell yourself that just isn't true. All the clutter that we're hanging on to from the things that we were told or felt or experienced earlier in life. And I think Kristen is uniquely skilled at being able to do this. So why don't you tell us a little bit about where you think mental clutter comes from?
Yes. So, as you said, mental clutter being those limiting beliefs, those fears that tend to arise when we are kind of on the step before something that we desire to do, step before maybe organizing that closet, or maybe it's trying to avoid, negative news, right? Making those positive choices for ourselves. So a lot of that actually comes up from our life experiences, and they may not even have to do with clutter per se. And so some examples of these experiences can include ancestral trauma and familial conditioning. So basically, those thoughts, those behaviors, those ways of being that generations before us have had, and then just pass on, pass on, pass on if they aren't broken. Another example is chronic stress. Another is complex trauma, where after repeated exposure to some forms of abuse, like racism, sexism, lack of attunement from our caregivers. And another is also societal conditioning. All the expectations that this world has on us, what size clothing we need to be perfect, to do it all yourself, to work really hard. And I'll give you an example. So, and this will I'll draw on ancestral trauma. So your great 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 grandmother grew up in poverty and was a single mom. She did absolutely everything she could to feed her children, to have the roof over their heads, to pay the bills, and thus had to keep and conserve everything in life. These ways of thinking and these behaviors were absolutely necessary for her and her children's survival. Now, this gets passed on to her kids and their kids and their kids and their kids, and then your parents, and then to you. And you might no longer be living in poverty. However, that scarcity mindset, that impulse to conserve and to keep everything, it still remains. And so all that has been passed down to us or accumulated from these negative experiences stay with us if we don't release and work with them. And at one point, they serve to protect us or our ancestors, but now they no longer serve us.
It's interesting. First of all, you talk about like societal expectations, and the episode of Lighten Up that I dropped today for everybody. So, we're in February right now and recording for an episode in April. But the episode today was about outdated and unrealistic expectations. Do I have the beautiful Pinteresty home, and is my body rocking this great bathing suit as summer is coming up, or we're on winter vacations? And I think that those unrealistic expectations have existed for a very long time, but social media has made it so much harder to live up to our expectations, the things that we actually really want for ourselves, not based on what other people say or do or post, and all of those kinds of things. And you also make me think, for sure, your parents being immigrants affected a lot of the way you grew up. I think of anybody who has lived through any kind of Holocaust, because we know that wasn't the only one and the only countries that it happened in. But when we think about how the family experiences life through the lens of being a survivor, they are a survivor of. So I think we get an idea of where these blocks are coming from, but how do they manifest in our bodies? And then what do they either do, or what do they prevent from happening?
Yes. Okay. So, as I mentioned, these blocks show up in our body in many different ways. It can show up as a thought, it can show up as a feeling. So, it can be anxiety, it can be fear, It can show up as a sensation. It can be, your heart beating really fast. It can be tension. And what's really amazing is I don't even like to call them blocks, because in truth, they're really just protectors. These are parts of ourselves that are showing up to keep us safe. However, it no longer is serving us in this moment. And
Right. Let me ask you a question, if I may.
yeah.
So this is like no secret. I've talked about it before. I have IBS. My mother has IBS. She had it like for as long as I can remember, like really serious, like not coming out of the bathroom for what felt like days to a little girl. And mine didn't really show up or manifest until much later in life. Like I was in my 40s when I first was like, I think there's something going on here. And what I know is stress hits and I'm like running for the bathroom in minutes. Like, and I know that it is a stress response. It's not like, you held it in too long or whatever. I know some people are like, oh my God, TMI. But I think it's important to address because I recognize this as a stress response as opposed to there being something wrong with my body. Is that the kind of things that you're talking about in terms of sensations?
Yes, absolutely. So when you are, even if consciously you don't realize you don't feel safe, a certain scenario can trigger you and your body might not feel that it is safe. And as a result, it's going to try to stop you through those thoughts, through those fears. And it does impact you biologically. IBS is a biological response to stress. So, on that note, I want to say that a lot of these protectors that come up are connected to the body. So, what I mean by that is 10 to 20% of information that we receive from the world comes in first from our mind, and then our mind informs our body. 80 to 90% of experiences and information in the world come through our body, and then that informs the mind. What that means is that all of our negative experiences, these limiting beliefs, I won't say all, but the majority, fears, all of that is stored in the body. So even though we know and we desire to declutter our life, have more spaciousness, more freedom, more organization, more energy, we know it, but it's not until we work with the body that we do somatic work, embodiment work, that we can support these protectors, these blocks within.
Okay. I so want to get to that. Okay, how do we do this? But you made me think of another thing. And I have been told, and I believe wholeheartedly, that the idea of go with your gut instinct, meaning
Mm.
gut is your second brain. And so stress going to my digestive system and all the things that follow to me is you're not managing the stress in your first brain, so the stress is all going to that second brain, your gut. So what are your thoughts on that
Mm.
theory or whatever?
I would say that when we are in a stress state, oftentimes we do move from kind of those subconscious fears and those limiting beliefs. However, you can hold a stress state, and at the same time, if you're able to bring in some safety in the body, some calm in the body, then you can move into a more empowered state and make better decisions. And so I would say that being in stress, if you're able to bring in that safety, you can hold both at the same time and act from an empowered state. I hope I was answering your question.
No, I think
Yes,
no, I
sir?
think that's great.
Okay.
So tell me a little bit. Tell us about what somatic work looks like. Like a client comes to you, what could they expect?
I would say usually the first step with somatic work is building safety in the body. All of these emotions like anger and fear and sadness, we tend to suppress them, avoid them. We don't want to feel them sometimes. And when you go into the body, if you haven't expressed them, they're there. They Until you express these feelings, they're going to compound, compound, compound. And for a lot of people, it can feel very scary to go into the body and work with those different feelings and those sensations. So the first is building safety in the body to feel safe enough to feel those uncomfortable feelings. And then once we've established that, there's different things that we could do. And one includes working with those blocks. We invite those blocks, we feel into those blocks, and we can allow them to release their charge, right? When we feel them with that safety there. Thing that we can do is what I call somatic parts work, where that one part of you is really desiring to declutter your life, all right? And then there's another part of you that is like, I am so scared to get rid of things because what if they're valuable? Or, what if I'm going to need it later on in life? And what somatic parts work does is it mends that relationship between your desire and that fear and that limiting belief so that they can kind of coexist in harmony, and ultimately you can do what you desire. So those are
Wow.
some examples of, there's so many things that we can do, but in connection to limiting beliefs and blocks, those are some things that a somatic, embodiment session could look like.
Sure, sure. So tell us more. What other things might it look like?
So, another example is what I call magnetism, or embodying what you desire. And so that is bringing in the sensations of, the feelings of, the thoughts of, the images of what you desire. It's really just allowing yourself to sense and feel into what life would be like: organized, spacious, clear. And that's a really amazing tool, because when you're in that frequency, when you're in that energy, you can really attract what you desire. You're sort of in that right, decision making place to do things as if you're already there.
Sounds like law of attraction to me. Is that fair? Is that a fair assessment?
I would say yes, it's very similar to law of attraction and being in, the same frequency. Yes.
Gotcha. Because I spent many years being like, manifesting is BS. You can't make things happen because you want them to happen. And I'd like to say, as I mature into my 40s and 50s, I began to understand that better. And if for no other reason that, things have energy. I talk about this all the time with my clients. Things have energy, and you keep the things that have good energy, you let go of the things that have bad energy. And if you can't tell, then you really have to have like a conversation with yourself and with the thing that maybe you're getting rid of. And it's hard to not recognize everything that we own as something that has positive energy that we want, to keep it. And this comes up a lot because people often think if they're working with a clutter coach that they're working with someone who wants them to be a minimalist, and that's not me. There are great organizers out there that believe in that, but I love things, I love colors, I love patterns, I love to touch things. I like when things are tactile and they have different textures to them. And so as a result, I am never going to, look like a minimalist. I could help someone become one if that was really their dream. I just think you have to let go of the things that are getting in the way of you experiencing life in a positive way. And that often means letting go of things. And it often means letting go of things that it is uncomfortable to do because maybe it was something that belonged to your grandmother, and that the energy, her energy is in the thing. That may be true. But if it's something you didn't like, it just happened to have been on her shelf, a piece of jewelry that doesn't fit, your aesthetic, then we have to really be able to ask ourselves the question, does this have the energy that I want it to have? And I used grandmother as an example. Would my grandmother want me to be physically and mentally weighed down by her stuff, as opposed to that item, because maybe it's only one that you keep, that one item really like speaks her language, and you can like hear her voice in that item. So yeah, I think that that's really helpful way to assess, should something continue to be here. Are there other examples of ways that you work with clients?
Yeah, I would say, part of the work I do is to encourage clients to take action towards their goal. And something in connection to protectors and to blocks is inviting people to take an action, a small action that counters or speaks the opposite of the fear that you have. So an example might be if you are afraid to give away, an item because it might be, valuable, or you might want it in the future. An example action, but of course it's always based off of what, the comes from the client. But an example would be giving up a smaller item and maybe giving it to a friend to hold on to it. And for a lot of people, you might feel anxiety or fear. And to support you through that, bring in a resource. So bringing in a resource is allowing yourself to kind of just bring in a little bit of safety and calm into the body. And that can be doing some breathing. It can be taking a walk. It can be doing tapping, whatever works for that person. And then you take that action with a little bit of safety. It makes it a little easier to lean into your nervous system's edge. And then you've done it, and then you wait, and then you see that, okay, you know what? I have not needed that item after a month. And so once you take that action, you build a tolerance and the confidence to do more and more and more. And it's also building the tolerance of your nervous system. It's able to hold a little bit more anxiety on that, a little bit more anxiety on it. So that's another thing.
That's awesome. I love this. Okay, so but let's be real. There are people who are going to listen and say, "Oh, this sounds so woo-woo." I hate the statement woo woo. However, we know people will say that. So what would you say to someone who's like not quite a believer yet?
Well, I would say, to be honest, a lot of this is backed in science. I wouldn't even call this woo woo. But let's say if we want to call it that, okay? Let's say, let's say we want to do that. I would say if you've been trying things for a long time and it hasn't worked, why not? Why not? Because it's worked for a lot of people, including myself. So why not? Have a little bit of openness. It doesn't hurt, because you know what? It might just change your world. It might just transform you.
I love your answer. Like 120% if that's possible. Because what I have been telling people when I launched my program, and I was like, okay, I have this thing. It's called the Design Your Healthy Life Strategy. And what I do is I help people get healthy and lose weight by removing the physical and mental clutter in their lives. People are like, okay, that sounds interesting. And this is for everyone who has tried everything else. Because at the end of the day, I think, for anybody who's ever struggled with their weight, and, if you don't know me already, to any potential listeners, I once weighed well over 200 pounds and I am barely 5'3". I know what it's like to be weighed down physically by your weight and weighed down physically and mentally by all of the things that made the weight come on. And so I want people to know, you know what? If you have tried the typical eat less and move more and it hasn't worked, let's start with the brain. Let's start with the mindset first, a mindset first methodology. And so for anybody who's like, oh, I don't have clutter or whatever, it's, you know what? Let's try it. Let's see how this will be different. So, and that made me think of something, because you said, I'm looking at notes that I took from you. It's, while I say I have a mindset first methodology, you kind of, what I hear, and you'll correct me if I'm wrong, is that this is actually in the body first, not in the mind first. Am I getting that right?
Say that it is both. I think it's about working with both. There is definitely value in mindset work, and there is definitely value in body work. And I think when we can combine them, it's like really strong.
Gotcha.
Yeah.
So, what would you want someone to know about what you do? Maybe something we haven't touched on yet.
Something really amazing about the work that I do is that a lot of this has been drawn from our ancestors, healing modalities that have existed for centuries. And it also integrates, more modern day methodologies. And I think that's really beautiful and powerful that this healing modality has existed for such a long time, and has made such an impact for other people. Another thing I want to just say is that we're talking about mental clutter and protectors, limiting beliefs and fears. And I invite you to hold compassion for yourself with that. First off, all of us have these blocks in one way or another. All of us have had experiences and ancestral trauma that have contributed to this. And just also see it as an opportunity for power and for transformation for yourself. That when you're able to work on this and you're able to see yourself more authentically and accept yourself for everything that you have, because blocks are not negative. When you're able to do that, the journey of life becomes a lot more exciting and easy and joyful. Yes, it will be challenging at times, and that's okay, but guess what? That means that you are alive.
Right.
Yes, it's good. It's good to feel those emotions. They are necessary. Anger, sadness is so necessary. So hold compassion for yourself and enjoy the journey.
I love that. I feel like we should finish on that because it's such a great thought, but I have so many more questions. So you make me think about the fact that I'm going to use Eastern medicine as a phrase here, whether it's applicable or not. But what it makes me think is, so Eastern medicine has been around for a long time, a long, long, long time before Western medicine. So we have to respect the fact that there are so many components of Eastern medicine that we should be adopting into our everyday lives. But that doesn't mean that I wouldn't get an antibiotic if I had a really bad infection. It doesn't mean that I wouldn't get chemo if I had cancer, that I wouldn't, marry the two in some way. Because if I do Eastern only, I am missing out on healing modalities that exist in Western medicine and vice versa. And if you're not open to both, maybe this is a really great time to become more open to both.
100%.
Just a
What do you
thought.
have to lose? Again,
Exactly.
like if it's not, if you tried it and it's not working for you, try something else, try something new, open your
Right.
mind.
Right. Being open-minded. Oh, again, like, how close-minded so much of what's happening right now is, or like just how binary it is. It's good or it's bad. There's no, like maybe it's good because it was bad and you learned to navigate through that. I just think, we talk a lot about blocks, and I also think about how, for me, for so many years, when I felt uncomfortable, whether it was anger, frustration, like the really high emotions, or it was down, like really sad, depressed emotions, food was always the answer to feeling better. But it wasn't because it actually made me feel better. It was a band-aid. It was a painkiller. It was a temporary relief, and usually left me feeling worse because this was, the journey to gaining weight and then maintaining a very high weight. But before me, my father was a drug addict, same thing. And before him, my grandfather was a gambler, and this comes out in almost every episode because it is so connected to everything that we're doing now, and recognizing that gambling or using drugs or using food or alcohol or smoking or whatever other negative and unwanted behavior there is was just a way to push that down further and
Yes.
further, as opposed to fixing the problem or maybe not fixing the problem, but addressing it, like recognizing it as opposed to trying to ignore it.
100, 100, 100%. Yeah.
And I want to be fair, because the reality is that food is yummy. Textures are yummy, mixtures of flavors. And like, I don't want anybody ever to feel like I demonize food, because I don't. I still love food. And I can tell you all my favorite foods and why, and what combinations that I love. But when we're using food to mask a feeling as opposed to using it to fuel the body, and I don't mean like food should only be for fuel and not for pleasure. No, it needs to be both. It needs to be both, but that also for some people really necessitates a much higher level of consciousness of what's happening when you're eating, and taking your time and really like enjoying the tastes, the mixture of tastes, the textures, and all the things that make food amazing. And it's not just taste and texture. What it smells like is important. What it looks like is important. And I would even argue in some cases what it sounds like, like the popping of popcorn, like is like adds to, all of the experience. Popcorn is something I eat almost every day. And so hearing it pop, like for me, is like one of those really great, like end of day moments. So yeah, I don't want anybody ever to think that I'm demonizing food, but recognizing that food has a purpose, and there are other things that we might use food for, and that's not the true purpose behind it, but it's what we know. Because
Mm.
generational, if we're going to talk about generational trauma, I think about how like my grandmother lived in poverty, and so like pushing food was like a thing that you did because of that. And that's just like one tiny example. So before we finish up, I know I said what else would you want people, listeners to know, but like, before we log off, a closing thought or something that you feel is really important for people to hear.
Well, I would say the very fact that you all are listening to this episode means that you are desiring something better for yourself. And I think that's amazing in itself, that you took the time to be here to listen, to learn, and to explore something that might be supportive for you and your dreams. And so, if anyone does want to work on their blocks, their limiting beliefs, their fears, because you are a listener for Melanie's podcast, and Melanie is wonderful, and you're all wonderful, you can have a 20% discount for a session with me on that. So I'm happy to do that. And I'm so thankful for this opportunity. I feel like for me, somatic work, embodiment work is truly a revolution. It is a new paradigm, a new way of living in the world, which is loving all the different parts of yourself, those fears, those limiting beliefs, connecting with your true and deep desires and living from that space, embodying that space, how you dress to every decision you make. So grateful to share that gift. And yeah, thank you.
I love that. It was so important for me to have you here because, my goal in this podcast, which as I record today has dropped 8 episodes. By the time yours airs, will be closer to like 15 or 16 episodes. But it is so important for me to share with the world the impact that removing physical and mental clutter can have. And that doesn't mean that my way of doing it is the only way. There are all these other really great people out there who, I like to say, some of the guests that I'm having on didn't even realize that what they did was help people with clutter, because we haven't been really talking about it in that way. And so my goal is to just keep bringing people on like you who have so much to share. There is someone out there that's listening right now that needs your help. Like, for sure. I said someone, there's so many people out there, but I am confident that someone who is listening right now is going to reach out to you because of everything that you have to offer. So thank you for being here today.
Yes. Oh, it was my pleasure. And Melanie, you do amazing and necessary work. And I can absolutely see how both what we each do complements each other so well. So very appreciative.
I think it's really appropriate to finish with a mutual admiration society chat, which I think we've just had, and I think is great. Thank you for tuning into this episode of Lighten Up, the Art of Living Clutter-Free. I hope you found a spark of inspiration to help declutter not just your space, but your mind and life as well. If you enjoyed this episode, please be sure to subscribe, leave a review, and share it with someone who could use a little lightness in their life. Remember, it's not about being perfect, it's about progress. Small steps lead to big changes, and I'm here to help you every step of the way. For more tips, resources, and ways to connect, check out my website, follow me on social media, and don't forget to check out the Design Your Healthy Life Strategy program to take your transformation even further. Until next time, keep letting go of what no longer serves you and making room for what truly lights you up.